What's going on, guys? V-Line here, and welcome back to another episode of Kerbal Space Program. We've been doing a lot of missions to Mun and Minmus in our downtime and have gathered a lot of funds and a lot of science. We've unlocked almost all the available science in the R&D complex, and we've also fully upgraded all the buildings in the Kerbal Space Center except the runway and the tracking station. And we still haven't actually left Kerbin's sphere of influence. But before we start launching missions to Duna and to Gilly and to Jewel and all those other fine places, we need to start getting a communications network up and running. What do I mean by that? Well, if we look to the tracking station, it says here max DSN power. That means Deep Space Network. Now, what this means is that in order to help you communicate across distances, like for instance between Kerbin and Duna, your average command pods won't be able to handle that kind of range. What you're going to need to do is set up some relays in between. So what we're going to do today is we're going to set up a relay, or in fact a few relays, around Kerbin, and we're going to make it interesting by making it a geostationary orbit of about 3 satellites, meaning that Kerbin is constantly covered and has no blind spots. So here we are in the VAB, and we have this lovely little relay satellite that I designed right here. Tried to make something that was easy to control, had enough delta V to do the maneuvers that I would need to do in this case, and could generate its own power, and I didn't really need a strong relay antenna. Now, the important thing about relay satellites, what you need to actually establish connections between crafts across the Kerbin system, is there are 2 types of communications. There's direct and there's relay. Now, direct means that the antenna will try to communicate directly to either the Kerbal Space Center or the nearest relay satellite. And relay basically means that it can relay that information. So if your regular antenna doesn't have enough strength in order to reach the Kerbal Space Center on its own from where it's positioned, if it can reach a relay satellite in between, then they can pass it along, and then you can establish a connection, meaning you'll still have control of your vessels even if you're too far away for a normal connection. So I have the cheapest and shortest range relay right here, just because it's powerful enough for the area that we're currently exploring. It has a range of 5 million miles, while our tracking station has a range of about 50 billion miles, and you get the combined range. You combine the two. You take the 5 million of our antenna multiplied by the 50 billion of the tracking station, and then take the square root of that, and that gives you 500 million miles, and that is the maximum distance that they can have between the two, the antenna and the tracking station. So here we are. We have 1 toroidal fuel tank and 1 spark engine. We have the most advanced probodobodyne HECS2 probe core. We have 4 solar panels, which are 1 × 6 solar panels, so they can generate enough power. We also have, if I can just get these solar panels to go back in, there we go, retract solar panels. So inside the probodobodyne itself, we also have 2 monopropellant tanks, very small ones, and you see we have some thrusters, some RCS thrusters all around the craft, just so we can maneuver it and angle it away when need be. We also have a fairly big battery pack, 1,000 electric charge. That should be more than enough, just in case for some reason, I don't know, the sun gets blotted out. They shouldn't be outside the sun for more than a few hours, because they're just going to be around Kerbin. They should always have sunlight no matter where they are most of the time. And that's it. So what we do is we want to save this as a subassembly, this whole thing. So what we do is we need to grab it by the root part, and in this case what I did is I changed the root part from the probe core, I changed it to the engine right here. So let's switch back to here. So at the moment the engine here is the root part, so we managed to go and drag it into the subassemblies, I am not having any luck with words today. So we saved it here as relay. You can see if I take it out, it's the exact same thing, and it'll stick from the engine. Now that's going to help us when we add our lifter. So if we actually go ahead, we're going to create a new craft. So yeah, save and continue. We're just gonna, no, we want a new craft. We are going to start with, I believe, the RC0015 remote guidance unit. We can just find where they placed it. Right here. That's good. And now what we want to do is we want to grab some coupling. We're going to grab the TR stack separator. We're going to add it here. We're going to drop the force down to 0 because we want that when we decouple it, we already want to be in the proper altitude when we decouple, and you'll see what I mean in a few minutes. So we don't want the force of the decoupling to change our altitude too much. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back to the subassemblies, and we're going to grab our relay, and there it is. Stick it like that. Now we can take another one, stick it there, take another one, stick it right there. And that's good enough for now. Now what we're going to do is we're going to grab a fairing. We're going to stick it under here. And we're going to start dragging it on. We're going to make a proper cross section. Then we're going to lift it up. Make another cross section. Lift it up. Another cross section. And there we go. We can make this bigger or smaller as we see fit. And in this case, I'm going to make it as tall as possible because it's not going to add too much to the cost and too much to the mass, but it is going to help us with aerodynamics. So now we have all our probes safely tucked away in this little protective shell, which is going to prevent them from being destroyed when we're actually taking off. And for this mission, it's going to be enough to grab our mud lifter, stick it right there. And we're going to make sure all our staging is correct. We actually, in fact, we're not going to need this. We're definitely not going to need the little decoupler right there because we already have stack separation here. And then we'll be able to use this probe core to actually possibly make our parts go back into Kerbin and crash down and not leave any junk flying in space. So if we go here, we actually want a bit of generation in this part itself, so we're going to grab, I believe, actually no, come to think of it, we actually would like a decoupler right, or maybe we don't. I'm going to say we don't at this point. So we have our craft ready right here. Everything should be organized. What we are going to do, we're going to do one thing. We're going to grab our probe core. We're going to have it face east. We're going to make sure our staging is set up properly. So one thing we're going to do, this goes to here. Then we want our probes to separate first this, then this, then this. So we're going to see which one are you. You're the bottom one, and we want you to go last. So there we go. And then the middle one. So we want you to fire after you. Yeah, so we want to drag you up here. And that should do it. And I think our craft is ready to launch. Let's just name this Geostationary. Okay. So now I decide I need an action group to help launch all my solar panels at once. I end up going with the gear action group because you can easily toggle it with the G key. So I go and I choose all of my solar panels, and then I choose the toggle solar panels while I have the gear action group selected. Once I have all those selected and put in the action group, it's time to launch. So I just used MechJeb here to help get my craft in a 85-kilometer orbit, just so I don't have to worry about it too much. It's pretty straightforward. We've done this several times before. The fairing on top is really going to help protect our probe cores and also protect the entire craft from being dragged downwards by aerodynamic forces. You can see here it's starting to heat up. We've got those burning effects all around our rocket. And right here I see I'm having some weird lighting issues. You see I get all this like weird orangey glow all over my screen. So I head out to map view and we're already at our desired apoapse. So now we're just coasting. And once we're burning to circularize, we're gonna dump those 2 booster stages as well as the fairing. They're gonna go pretty much hand in hand. And you can see here we dump that, then we dump the fairing because we're above the atmosphere, so we don't have to worry about our probes being damaged. And then we're circularized. Now, according to the wiki, synchronous orbit above Kerbin is achieved at an altitude of 2,863.33 kilometers above the surface. Now, in order to help me achieve that as finely as possible, I'm again getting help from MechJeb here. I'm just setting my apoapse at 2,863.33 kilometers and having it do that at the periapse. My periapse will still be below, and we're not going to go straight up to synchronous orbit with this craft because we want to be able to evenly space our probes. Okay, so now that we've raised our apoapse to the right altitude, we want to raise our periapse to about half that altitude. We don't want to raise it all the way just yet. We want to have an orbit that takes about 2/3 as long to complete as a synchronous orbit, because what we're going to do once we have that orbit, which is going to be, again, the periapse is going to be about half the height of the apoapse to get that started, is every time we're going to pass by the apoapse, we're going to release a probe, and we're going to have the probe itself raise its periapse so that it's circularized. And that way, that's going to put the probe in a synchronous orbit. Then, both the probe and the rest of the craft are going to go around Kerbin. And because the main craft is going to complete a smaller orbit, it's going to get to the same point faster. It's going to come out ahead of the probe. And then it's going to release the next probe. And once again, and it's going to, once the main craft reaches the apoapse again, it's going to be ahead of the other 2 probes. So they're still going to be evenly spaced out. Again, it's 2/3 to a whole, meaning that when the main craft reaches its apoapse, the probes that are released are at the very most 1/3 of an orbit away from the main craft. So it's release a probe, complete an orbit, the released probe is going to be 1/3 of an orbit away, you release the next probe, and again. And that way, what we're going to come out with is 3 completely evenly spaced probes, all in geosynchronous orbit, which, if we launched each probe separately, that would be very hard to do. Now, this works not just with geosynchronous orbits, but with any orbit. If you release a probe and at a 2/3 orbital period and then have it accelerate to complete the orbit, then what's going to happen, and you do that 2 more times, what's going to happen is you're going to have 3 evenly spaced probes. Now, you can do this with any kind of system. You can have it with 3 different probes. You can have it with 5 probes evenly spaced. All you have to do is you have to do the math of the orbital period. You want to have the apoapse at the right height, and the periapse you want to have at a lower height. And you can see we're using we're using Kerbal Engineer in order to see what our orbital period is and time our maneuvers and plan our maneuvers accordingly. This way, we're just going to be able to make sure we get as fine an orbit as possible. Obviously, you can't always get the orbit exactly right on the 0.000 decimal point. It's just not possible. There's so many things to factor in. I also use MechJeb to help me just fine-tune my orbits just that much, so I don't undershoot, I don't overshoot, but still, nothing is perfect. But this way, you can get it as close to perfect as possible. I'm using both Kerbal Engineer and MechJeb. You can use just Kerbal Engineer, that's fine. MechJeb, I don't think shows anywhere the post-burn orbital period and the current orbital period, which is two of the most important pieces of data to have when you're trying to evenly space out your craft. But that's it. The keen-eyed among you may have noticed that my first probe may have slightly gone a bit off course. I had a few problems with it, but I managed to save it. Quick save and quick load are your friends here, but there we have it. Look, we have 3 evenly spaced probes. Those lines coming off each probe are connections to the ground bases on Kerbin, and there are also red lines between the 3 probes. That just means that they're a bit far away from each other in order to fully connect, but they're still close enough. But what's important is that they're all connected, plus I still had some fuel and some electric charge in my lifter stage, so I just launched that back at Kerbin, just hit my periaps as hard as I could just to avoid Kessler syndrome. And that's it. Here it's just going back into the atmosphere, and then I just have all my satellites already in a perfectly spaced orbit, so I don't have to worry about them anymore. I'm just lowering my apoaps, my periaps. I'm just wasting as much fuel as I can because this thing's gonna detonate. It really doesn't matter. I did try to burn off some heat here just so I could see if I could save any parts of the rocket, but no chance of that. And I'm just letting it fall here. I debated whether I should try to quick load or anything, but no, I'm just letting it fall here. And pretty much nothing's gonna survive from this. It's gonna hit the ground pretty hard. And here we go, 3,000 meters, 2,000, and here we hit the ground, and nothing survived. One piece flew off a bit, but then crashed back down. But there we go. All our satellites are evenly spaced. We have set up the first part of our relay network. And finally, we end our mission to launch 3 evenly spaced satellites into space, just with a nice, relaxing view of a satellite in a synchronous orbit above Kerbin. You can see that the satellite's rotating. Even when I speed up the orbit, satellite will be rotating, but the planet is not rotating underneath us because we are going at the exact same speed that the planet's rotating, so we just stay above it at all times, and that's the beauty of synchronous orbit. However, you can see even when we speed up our orbit, like nothing's happening to the planet itself. One thing you should always note here is that synchronous orbits are very bad for scanning the surface of a planet simply because they stay above the same spot at all times, and they'll only ever be able to scan one point on that planet or one area of that planet. But that's all for now. Thank you everyone for watching. Don't forget to click that like button, click that subscribe button, click that bell notification icon, and leave a comment down below, and I will see you all next time. Peace!